Okay, happy Monday and welcome back. Hope you had a nice weekend. There'll be another one just ahead. Seemed like a couple days, just watch. Zoom. We're going to talk to Craig Winn first hour tonight, and don't leave us. Second hour, a world exclusive, one of the most stunning UFO ET encounters in a long time. You'll hear from the individual who experienced it. And then third hour, live to South Africa for an update on that imploding catastrophe down there. The blacks are going crazy. They're killing other blacks from other countries, burning them to death. The kind of thing you've heard about before, but it's really getting to be bad. So we're going to cover a lot of material tonight. Craig Winn was on several weeks ago regarding the Dead Sea Scrolls, of which he has spent, I think, 20 years or more slowly and methodically analyzing and trying to discover that which they hold. Tonight we're going to talk in part two of that conversation about the translations of the Dead Sea Scrolls and what we learn or what we should learn or what we might learn from them. Hello, Craig. Welcome back.
Hello, Jeff. My pleasure to be with you. It is a wonderful Monday evening.
Yeah. We made the first visit with Craig into a YouTube video. We'll probably follow this one as well, so you can certainly pass it around and share. And when you look back on our first conversation, anything we missed that you want to mention before we go on into tonight's topic?
I guess if we were to summarize it, Jeff, it was that surprising to most people, particularly in the Western world that is so influenced by Christianity, that the Christian New Testament is a completely and totally unreliable document. That any study of it, any open-minded and rational review of it, demonstrates that of the 69 pre-Constantine manuscripts, all of which were unearthed in Egypt, written during the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th century CE, before Constantine's influence, which was wholly negative to the fidelity of the text itself. It became far less credible after Constantine.
Now, these these documents were on animal skins, if I remember correctly?
No, the Dead Sea Scrolls are written on parchments. They're on animal skins, but the codexes of portions of the Christian New Testament are in codexes which were written on parchment, not parchment, but on papyrus. And so 69 pre-Constantine manuscripts have been found. And the significance of them is that there are some 300,000 known variances between the text of those earliest manuscripts and the basis of the English translations of what's called the New Testament. And there's only 184,000 words in the so-called Christian New Testament. So there's more variances than there are words. So this notion that it is an errant document, it really is laughable in the extreme. It's this is not an opinion. I'm not trying to shock anyone. I'm just revealing something that is irrefutable. That the text is completely unreliable, and its history is extraordinarily convoluted. It goes from recording Hebrew conversations in Greek, which is a language very poorly adapted to convey Hebrew thought. Then it was translated into Old Latin. The Old Latin text became so variant that Jerome of Roman Catholic fame wrote to the Pope that says, if we don't destroy all of these variant copies and proclaim one as truth, then we're not going to be credible. And the only way for him to do that was to amalgamate them, homogenize them, if you will, into so variant manuscripts were merged together to create a consensus document. Now that's not exactly unfiltered truth inspired by God. And then and his translations were not of the Greek and certainly not of the Hebrew conversations, but of Old Latin into the Latin of his day. And that became the only authorized and legal document to hold in the Roman Catholic world. And anyone like John that translated it into the lingua franca of the day, into English, for example, was hunted down and killed by the Roman Catholic Church. And even the first English translations weren't translations of the Hebrew. They weren't translations of the Greek. They were translations of the Latin into English. So now you're 4 languages removed from the language that was spoken. And even the history of English translations were all revisions of previous texts done for political purposes. So if you actually read, which I have done, and translate from the earliest 69 pre-Constantine manuscripts into English, you'll find that maybe one word in 5, one word in 6 is rendered accurately in the Christian New Testament. So it just is not a reliable text. Yeah.
Well, you're being polite by saying it's not reliable. Between
inaccuracies and inadequacy, it's probably 85% errant.
You're still being polite. You could call it a fraud, a hoax.
Yeah, it is a fraud. The Textus Receptus, which was the initial basis of the Protestant variation of Christianity, was in fact an academic and an economic fraud, a complete and utter fraud. And one of my books, I actually print Jerome's letter to the Pope, which demonstrates that he knew that his exercise was a fraud.
Well, all right. Well, wait a minute. Wait. Well, hold on. So what do we have here? We have the Bible. We have the book. And hundreds of millions of people, if not more, follow this, believe in it, and yet it could be up to 85% bogus, at least in terms of the New Testament. Do I have that right?
Well, yes, 2 things are true. One is the term Bible is not a godly term. Bible is based upon Babel, which is the very thing that God asked us to walk away from. In fact, it's the prerequisite for participating in the covenant is to walk away from Babel. So the very term Bible is a bogus term. It's the name of a town in Phoenicia that grew papyrus that was named after the Egyptian goddess Biblia, and so it's a pagan name based upon a town in Phoenicia that is based upon the Egyptian goddess's name, and so most certainly didn't name his book after a pagan goddess. So we start there, and we start to realize that even the term Babel, which is the term for Babylon, what it conveys in Hebrew is to intermix so as to confuse. And so what you read in much of, for example, Paul's letters in the basis of Christianity is a mix of Gnosticism, of Dionysus and the Greek religion, and his personal views, and you, in fact, get a commixing and that is very confusing. What is credible, the first point that I wanted to make as a summary is the Christian New Testament is incredible. And worse, 14 of the books were written by Paul, and 2 others, Luke and Acts, are about Paul. You might say, wait a minute, Luke is not about Paul.
This sounds like another Shakespeare farce. Who was Shakespeare? In a way. Who wrote all the plays?
The King James was probably crafted by Sir Francis Bacon, who was one of the candidates for having been Shakespeare.
This is earth-shaking material you're putting out here.
Oh, it is. It's better than any hoax that has ever been promoted. The reality here is far more amazing than any myth or any conspiracy that you've ever considered. Now, Luke was Paul's attaché. So Luke was not an eyewitness, so his testimony is not only hearsay, but he was heavily influenced by Paul. And Paul's the person that God calls out by name to say he's the plague of death. There is no individual in all of human history that God hates more than Paul. And he is responsible for half of the Christian New Testament. That's how big a problem Christians have with their New Testament. The text isn't reliable. They don't have anything Yosha, which is the real name of the person they call Jesus, said in the language that he spoke it. And the text has been maintained in such a careless and sloppy way, and in a way that serves the religious interests, that it's just no longer credible. Not even remotely credible. And half of it's influenced by a guy that contradicts God at every possible turn, Paul. Now, for anyone that's listening to this that says, wait a minute, I cannot even fathom that what you're telling me is true, then go online. It's free. I'm not trying to sell anything. And read questioningpaul.com. Questioningpaul.com takes 5 translations of Paul's letters and compares them to what God actually said, and demonstrates that Paul's view and God's view are the antithesis of one another.
Okay, this is stunning. When you said the New Testament is incredible, you weren't, just in case any of you missed it, he was using the term almost in a hyphenated sense.
Literally.
Incredible.
Yeah, literally.
It's not credible.
Not credible.
Not that it's credible. Cool, because the word is used, it's a double-edged sword. Okay. That said, with the Dead Sea Scrolls, is this a potential door that can be walked through to revise and restore and reissue the New Testament in a more credible fashion? Can changes be made? What are we learning here, Craig? This is huge.
Yes, and no. Until the very last part of that, you were onto something extraordinarily profound. It is a door. It's not potential. It exists. This door is wide open for anyone that wants to walk through it, that will reveal exactly who God is, prove his existence, demonstrate his name, reveal exactly what he is offering us, and precisely what he expects in return. The only part that isn't true, and this will again come as a shock, there is no such thing and will never be such a thing as a New Testament. Now, Christians are of the belief that God...
So it ought to be, we should just sit... hold on, please.
Yep.
So the New Testament should be just put on the shelf as an historic curiosity, religious historic curiosity, and then we just stay with what? The Old Testament? That's it?
Yeah. Well, there's only 2 books in the Christian New Testament that have a historic bent from an eyewitness point of view. The book of Matanya, which is spectacular. It is well written, but unfortunately for Christians, they have to discard almost all of Matanya, because Matanya and there, for example, in what's called the Sermon on the Mount, Yosha says, "Do not think that I came to destroy or annul the Torah, because I came to fulfill it." Not a single letter, not even the smallest stroke of a letter that comprise the Hebrew words that comprise the Torah and the prophets will be done away so long as the heavens and earth exist. So the most commanding and longest speech that Yosha, the real Jesus, actually made affirms that all you need is the Torah, and that the Torah still stands, which is the antithesis of the Christian point of view, at least as it was presented by Paul.
So Paul might have been working back then as if he were on contract from the National Enquirer.
Worse.
Oh, my.
Paul, in the second letter to the Corinthians, admits that he's demon-possessed.
Oh, how pleasant.
Yes. It's there for any Christian to read. Read the end of the chapter of 2 Corinthians, in the last chapter, and you will read that Paul admits that he is demon-possessed. The spirit that Paul met on the road to Damascus was Satan. He even quotes Dionysus when he says it's difficult to kick against the goat. That's a line from, it's the single most famous line ever written about Dionysus. It's in the play where Dionysus says, as a citizen of Greece, it's very difficult for anyone to go against the established religion or to oppose Dionysus because the society as a whole is so bought into the theory of the religion and to the gods that anyone who speaks against them will be considered crazy. So that's the purpose of the line in Dionysus, is it's difficult to kick against the goats. Single most famous line in Greek mythology, and Paul puts it on the lips of his so-called Jesus. But what's also interesting is that those that Eosha met with, he made the blind see and the lame walk. Absolutely opposite happened to Paul. He was walking and made lame, and he had sight and was blinded. Doesn't sound like the God I know.
No.
And then he lies about what he did thereafter. In Galatians, he says that he spent 13 years in Arabia, and yet in the book of Acts, he was up and gone within weeks and off touting his new religion.
Okay. How successful have you been at introducing these conclusions to the general Christian world? Are there any takers? Is there any interest?
A religious person, a person who is deeply religious, like a person who is deeply political, even a person who is devoted to conspiracy. If you take someone whose life is swallowed up, whether it be conspiracy, religion, or politics, for that is their core, right, their anchor.
I got it. Yeah.
Then evidence and reason don't prevail. So it doesn't matter what you were to say to such people, you are never going to convince such people. Of those people around the world who have read the translations that I have provided, I don't think there is a single person who has read the preponderance of what I have translated that hasn't come to accept and know and engage in a relationship with the God who inspired those words. But a religious person can't even read them. I mean, they will go immediately to all of the rational fallacies of attacking the messenger and slandering the messenger because they can't deal with the message. So I never try to approach a religious person. I made the mistake, I wouldn't call it a mistake, very early on, after I had been maybe a year into this. One of my closest friends was Jerry Falwell. Does that name ring a bell?
Sure.
Yeah, Jerry Falwell was the first televangelist, head of the moral majority, Thomas Road Baptist Church, that sort of thing. Yeah.
What are you saying here about Jerry? That he was on board with all this?
No. Oh God, no.
I can't imagine that.
Well, no. Yeah. Well, here's my meeting. I probably spent 10,000 hours with Jerry. We were very close friends.
Wow.
And as I began to, because I was once an ordained ruling elder in the Presbyterian Church, I was an evangelist. I was seriously both political and religious. And after I came back from my meetings with Al-Qaeda and began to not only translate the Quran and put the Quran in the context of Muhammad's life, I also began, because the Quran claims that it confirms the Torah, to translate the Torah out of Hebrew into English. And as I did that, I was stunned to find that God actually has a name, that he hates the term Lord, that he doesn't want to be worshipped, that he does not have a New Testament. Just one thing after another. For example, in Christianity, all souls either go to heaven or hell. That's not what God says. And so I learned about 100 things just in the first maybe the first year. And so I went to my good friend Jerry, and I said, what I want you to do is I want you to bring, because he ran Liberty University. That was his university. I said, I want you to bring your top Hebrew scholars. I want you to bring your top theologians, and I want you to carve out 5 or 6 hours, and I want to present to you what I have learned thus far. There is no Christ. The name Jesus was invented in the 16th century. Christmas and Easter are pagan holidays. There's no basis for Sunday, much less worship. God does not want you to bow down to him. He doesn't even ask you to pray to him. And so I presented the first 100 things that I had learned and the basis for them. over 5 hours with Jerry Falwell and the heads of the largest Christian university in the world, Liberty University.
Okay, hold on right there. Hold on right there. You presented how many things again?
Yeah, probably 100. It was 18 pages on my white paper that I took down to him.
Okay,
and at the end of 5 hours, Jerry said, everything you have said is true.
He did agree with you.
Oh, he said, everything you have said is true. We couldn't disagree with a single thing that you have mentioned. But if we were to say these things, and if I were to say these things, the people who show up and sit in the pews of my church and make their contributions would no longer arrive. The letters which arrive each week to support my university would no longer show up in the mail. And if you say these things, they're going to label you a kook. That was my last conversation with Jerry Falwell.
That's pretty amazing. Hold on, everyone. And for all of you who are interested in Western Christian religion and the Bible, hold on. Let's find out where this goes. That was an interesting little vignette of Jerry Falwell, and much more ahead with Craig Winn. Okay, welcome back. I'm talking to Craig Winn, who was throwing some bombs tonight. That Jerry Falwell story was, I wasn't there, but if it is, pardon the pun, gospel truth, Craig Winn must be smiling from time to time, although this is certainly an enormous tragedy because of the measure, the dynamics of such fraud are almost unequaled or unprecedented in my view of history. This is enormous. Go ahead, Craig.
Yeah, it is indeed. And by the way, Jerry Falwell was one of the most likable, lovable, personable men I've ever met. His people skills were extraordinary.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, I was flabbergasted by his response. And it's not something to smile at. It's something, initially you're just saddened, and then there's a sense of anger of how many others, like with Kenneth Copeland, that's worth $300 million with his televangelism empire, willfully, knowingly leading people astray for money. And
listen, anybody who gives money to those creeps, I guess deserves to lose it. It's sad. They're so blatantly obvious, beyond transparent.
Yes, but the same thing is true with the Roman Catholic Church. It's in fact the final beast of Babylon that God is asking people to leave is in a large part Roman Catholicism. It's a monster. God has horrible things to say about it, and the people who are devoted to it have squandered their lives. And so the bad news is that what I have shared with you thus far is not only true, it's irrefutable. And the evidence is overwhelming.
All right.
Craig? Yes.
Okay. Where do we go from here?
Yeah, that's the magic question. The fact of the matter is, I'm not taking God away from anybody. I am exposing and condemning the religious manifestations of God, which were created in man's image.
Absolutely.
And instead, introducing them through the Dead Sea Scrolls, through Yahweh's testimony in the Torah, prophets, and Psalms, to a God who's real. He's approachable. He's likable. He's liberating. He's fun. The amazing teacher, great communicator. And so there really is a God, and he proves his existence through prophecy. The whole concept of prophecy, Jeff, is so amazing because, you're talking about a UFO encounter in the next segment.
Yeah.
The reality of our universe is that time is not only a dimension, but that time flows differently depending upon one's proximity to either great velocity or mass or energy. And so that a being that is light oriented, that is energy based, is able to experience the whole of time at any time. So if you were on a photon of light, for example, you could see the past, present, and future simultaneously. God, as an energy-based being, as a being equivalent to light, can witness our future and our past, and therefore report what we're going to do in our future to us in our past, so that when everything he commits to writing, in some cases thousands of years before it occurs, happens exactly as he said it would, then if there are enough of those and there's no misses and they're all 100% accurate, he has proven his existence, and he has proven that he inspired the words that contain those predictions. And in fact, there are countless thousands of them that are very, in fact, amazingly specific. There are those that speak of the United States, and by the way, in a very, very negative and harsh light. There's those that speak of what's going to happen in Israel over the next 15 years. What's going to happen to the world at large over the next 15 years? What has just happened around the world? And so what we find here is that between presenting the creation account exactly as it occurred and the amount of time in which it occurred, and then the story of the flood exactly as it occurred and where it occurred, and then all of the interactions in history that have since been affirmed by writings within those countries, and all of these prophecies, God, whose name is Yahweh, proved emphatically that he exists and that he inspired the Torah, prophets, and Psalms, which comprise the Dead Sea Scrolls that I have translated. So he is knowable. He's approachable. Knowing is so much better than faith. And understanding is so much better than belief.
Whoa. Knowing is so much better than faith. Faith, correct. That's a wonderful and a strong emotional, spiritual paradigm. However, it's not predicated on anything factual, generally speaking.
Correct. Yeah, in fact, if you know there's no purpose for belief, the only purpose for faith is if you can't or do not know. So if you can know, then faith is infinitely inferior. And there is something better than knowing, which is understanding. Understanding is the product of not just knowing, but making the kind of connections.
Of course. Yeah, you got to process
that lead to conclusions, and that's infinitely more powerful than just knowing. And so God can be known, he can be understood, but it takes a willingness to invest the time to listen to what he had to say, and an open mind so that you're willing to go where the words lead, even if they lead you away from the things that you have previously believed to be true.
Well, all right. Religion, I don't care which one, they're all construct of hustlers and scammers and con artists, people who are out to make money, control, dominate, kill,
totally true.
You name it, rape, pillage, all right, under the name of some divine being. I've always found organized religion, and I'm not talking about the spiritual essence of the golden rule, things like that, all right? That's how I try and live my life. But what we're talking about here is the unmasking of not just the Christian biblical New Testament fraud, but all religions. They're all frauds. They're all constructs of hustlers.
And until you have that appreciation, until you understand that, for example, in the West, that the Christian New Testament isn't credible, that Paul was a fraud, then the likelihood of you being able to appreciate what God reveals in the Torah, prophets, and Psalms is nil.
Of course, you're screened right out of it. I understand what you're saying.
You're screened right out of it. And so, for example, our good friend that you mentioned at our last show, Jerry McLaughlin, is listening. He says, why don't you get into the explanation of how we spend eternity with God? He said it emailed to me. Well, the fact of the matter is that unless we clean the slate first. Unless you have listeners who are willing to let go of conspiracy and religion and politics and go follow Yahweh's words to where they lead, nothing that I say is going to make, or he says, is going to make any difference. So we have to clean the slate before we can even begin to talk about what's true. And what's true, the first statement, there's one prerequisite to being part of the covenant, and there is no other way to have a relationship with God. There's only one path, according to God. It is through this family-oriented covenant relationship, and it has 5 terms and conditions, one of which is a prerequisite. And the prerequisite is the very thing we've been talking about. You have to be willing to walk away from religion and politics. You have to come to the point where you just stated that they're all man-made constructs, they're all complete frauds. They're means of certain people controlling other people and fleecing them of their money. When you're prepared to do that and you're willing to disassociate yourself from religion and politics, then you can approach God, and only then.
Is there eventually the probability of a new text coming out containing as much of reality from the Dead Sea Scrolls and incorporating it into the Old Testament? Is there a new?
Yes,
I'm not going to use the.
Yeah.
Go ahead. You've got the question.
Yeah. The answer to that question is yes and no. You have to know the right perspective, but everything that we need to know, God has provided in terms of teaching in the Torah, prophets, and Psalms. It's all there. There is nothing more that we need to know. It covers the entire swath of time, from expulsion out of the garden to our re-entry into the garden when he returns in what will be 2033. So all the information is there. The problem is that very few people have the will or energy to translate Paleo-Hebrew into the lingua franca of the world, which is English. And so I have tried to do the heavy lifting for people so that they can now read what God actually said in a manner that is both accurate and complete, and then write a commentary on what he said and those words so that they can go from knowing to understanding. And so God actually has a lot to say about this process that I've been involved in for the past 18 to 20 years. And so while it's not a new revelation, in the sense all of this information has been available to us for over 3,000 years, it is the first time that it has been, that these insights have been presented using God's words the way that he intended them to be understood. And so it is, in a way, profoundly fresh, profoundly revealing, and insightful and new, but only in the sense that no one has taken the time to do this in thousands of years. So, yes, there is a profoundly new text. God calls it a neck, a sign and a banner that he says he's going to lift up for the world to see. But no, it does not require any new revelation. It just requires us to take the existing revelation.
It's assembling. I got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, some will say, it's a new world order religion. It's a prank. It's a new one religion fits all. No, that's not what this is at all. And I'm sure you're going to hear that if you haven't already heard it.
Yeah, it's the opposite.
There are those. Yeah.
It's not a religion. God hates religion. And the last thing God wants is for us to amalgamize ourselves in any which way with the world. That first requirement of the covenant is that we walk out of the world of man if we want to engage in the world of God. So it's exactly the opposite. Rather than embracing all of the things of man, it's rejecting the things of man and embracing the things of God, the prerequisite for being part of his covenant family.
You need to...
And religion is the first thing we got to let go of.
And politics right behind it.
They're
politics. Neck and neck.
You know, and I've met so many of the world's leaders, and particularly America's political leaders. And quite honestly, every election is someone trying to choose between the lesser of two evils. There is no one in the political, on either side in the political forum that is the least bit credible or reliable or trustworthy or worth your vote.
Correct.
As a matter of fact, in the book of Samuel, the children of Israel decided, like all the Gentile countries, we want a king, we want a government like everybody else. And poor Samuel comes to God and he says, oh my God, I've really let you down. I've been your prophet here, but now they're choosing, rather than to listen to you and be guided by you, they want a government and a king. I'm so sorry, God, I've disappointed you. I have failed. And Yahweh says to Samuel, no, you haven't failed at all. And they're not rejecting you. By choosing a government, they're rejecting me. And then he says, tell them that these are the things that are going to happen to them if they choose a government of men. And he goes through and lists everything from taxation to sending men and women off to war, to bribing officials so that they serve the king or the president and fleece the people. It goes on, and God is literally describing why government and politics is something that we should not embrace. So you're right.
Do you have help along the way to assembling this data in a tome, a book? I won't use the term Bible, of course, but to do this, Craig?
Yeah, there's actually 20 books now that I have compiled. They average about 1,000 pages apiece, so they're long.
Right.
And they're comprised of the translations and then the commentary on them. And there's about 30 men and women around the world that edit them for me, because I typically write and translate faster than my fingers type accurately. So I make my share of typos, and they do that. And I have another maybe dozen or so, and some really spectacular researchers that because to make this transition from knowing to understanding, it's one thing for me to tell you this is what God said. It's another thing if he's, for example, talking about a particular culture or event, for me to go in and educate the reader as to what happened at this time and what do we know about this period, the people that were involved. And so I have a lot of people that will help provide that research. Right. So it's maybe 1,000 people all in all that make their contribution.
Okay. Now your books that you have written are there, and as we consider
there are a number
from
of sites. Yeah, they're really available all over the world and lots of different sites. But the first series that I wrote on the translations is called Yada Ya, and it's found at yadaya.com. Yada is you heard the old Seinfeld episodes, yada, yada, yada? Yada means to know. Yeah, yada means to know in Hebrew. It means to know and understand, to be acquainted with, be familiar with. And Yah is the familial form of Yahweh's name. So yada, Yah means to know Yah, which is to know God. And so yadaya.com is the first 7 volumes, and from there are links to an introduction to God that provides serious students, anyone that really is serious about this. I teach them how to translate. I tell them where to go to find the oldest manuscripts. I explain the nature of the Hebrew language and the verbs, and then I go through the 7 topics that are most interesting to God, and actually then teach translation by actually doing it and explaining the process. And the last books are called On Observations for Our Time.
Okay, these books that you have authored sound like the foundation and reference library upon which the new book will eventually stand. That's a possibility. I'm just speculating here. But this new book, to take people from faith to knowing to understanding, which is the journey that you're saying is out there for everyone. Am I correct?
And one thing better than it will, anyone who devotes the time to read these books, and they're all written in a way that every single word of translation is provided within the translation so that the reader can validate the accuracy of the translation themselves,
right,
that they will take everyone who has an open mind from either being an atheist and agnostic or starting to question their faith to knowing God, to understanding exactly what he's offering and expecting from us in return. And anyone that goes down, in fact, everyone that invests time in that study of who he is and what he has said, what he's offering and what he expects, because there's 5 benefits of the covenant and there's 5 requirements. Everyone that I know that has read these books has chosen to become part of the covenant, which means they've received not only eternal life, they've been adopted into God's family and have been enriched and empowered by him. So the end of the journey isn't just knowledge. It's not just understanding. It is an eternal relationship with the God who created the universe.
Well, that's what all the man construct religions claim to offer, but they don't. They don't. Now, we only have a couple minutes here. I'd like to see that quote from Falwell on the bottom of the front cover of a book. It's probably already been done. But I'm serious. How long? And this would have to be a book that would be serviceable in length. It can't be 5,000 pages. And I don't want it to be perceived by some people as a new Urantia kind of a book. You know what I mean? This has to be something that is assembled, collated, put together in such a way that it is appealing, it is inviting, it is challenging, it is promising. And it's got to be something you can pick up with one hand and get into. And I'm sure that's I'm just an observer here. You're the man. But are we looking at a time frame that you'd like to see something like this happen? And we're almost out of time, speaking of time.
Yes and no again. God's not impressed with numbers. He doesn't care if there are 5 people, 5,000, or 5 million in heaven. He has no interest in saving everybody. He's interested in building a family and having those who are willing to invest the time to get to know him as he is and engage in a relationship with him as he has laid it out. And so he never provides an easy answer because he doesn't want somebody just to genuflex and say, well, these are the 5 conditions. I'll just do those 5 things and I'm in, and still carry on with all of the mess of my life and my religion and politics. And then we have somebody in eternity that's going to make it miserable for the rest of us. So God's very specific in that the only way to know him is through our minds. We have to read, which uses the term observe. We have to observe, which is to closely examine and carefully consider what he has had written for us to consider, to listen to him, which we do by reciting out loud what he has said. These translations will help a lot in that regard. And then acting upon what we learn. And so God's not interested in making it simple for folks. He's not trying to save the world. He has invited everyone who is interested to engage in a relationship with him. He has made himself known through his testimony, which is what I've translated. And he has invited everyone who wishes to engage in this relationship to do so. But it's his home, it's his rules, and if we don't want to accept the terms and conditions of the covenant, you're not going to participate in it. It's just that simple. So I have, of all the books I've written, there's only one that is actually a short one. Most recently, someone who takes all of my books and makes them available in short-run printing at Amazon. They're not free at Amazon like they're online, but I don't make a penny on them. The person that buys them only pays for the printing cost. But there's a book called Written in Stone that's under my name, Craig Winn. In fact, all the books that I've written on the translations are available at Amazon. And this Written in Stone is only about 100 some odd pages. And what it does is it covers what's mistakenly called the 10 Commandments. There's not a commandment among them, but it's 10 instructions and it systematically goes through each of them and reveals what they actually say and how they apply to our lives. And that's the closest God ever gets to a summation, to something that you can grab in one hand and say, all right, I'm going to read through this because I want to have a summary of who he is and what he's offering and what he wants. And so,
got it.
Yeah, you can go to Amazon and I think it's like $3. I mean, it's very, very inexpensive.
The name again?
Printing cost. Written in Stone is the short book. But all the books that I've written, you can find either under Yada Ya at Amazon or under Craig Winn. And again, I'm not trying to sell anybody anything. I don't get a penny from them. The cost to purchase them is strictly the cost to print them.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Craig, thank you. Yeah. I don't know
You're welcome.
How this is going to float with a lot of people, but it's certainly there for anyone who would like to reach out and take a look at it. Let's leave it at that.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you for that. Just a remarkable conversation. Thank you, Craig.
Mm-hmm. Good night.
Okay. Good night.